Let me give you an introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to have our first educational session of the year. As you know, we do 4 to 6 a year. And last year, we also had the pleasure of having Tracy with us. Tracy is a doctor of chiropractic and also has a very strong calling to helping out equestrians through both breath work, soul channeling, and other ways to communicate with your animals that betters both your riding as well as your relationship with the horse and dogs and cats and what have you. So, but we're very pleased to welcome Tracy tonight to focus on breath work. As you all know, when you're riding and even when you're grooming and just around your horse, how you breathe is a really important aspect of how your horse interacts with you. So, I think we'll all really enjoy this. And Tracy, thank you so much for giving us your time and efforts on this.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me. Let me make sure my screen share works.
I'm seeing your screen.
Oh, can you see the slideshow thing?
It's showing your first page, I think. And then do you switch it to the next page and let's see.
Oh.
Mm.
Um,
No, it's all I'm seeing is the first page.
okay. Yeah, it says on my end that the screen sharing is paused, and I think because I'm logged into your it's through your account, it has to be enabled somehow.
Mm.
Um,
All right, but we're co-hosting, so we should be able to do that.
okay.
Share screen.
Let me go back. Let me just try doing it again. There we go. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there
I
you
think
go.
just because I logged in so early. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's really my goal that in the next 45 minutes that I just help you guys kind of have a framework and a structure for how beneficial attuning into our breath can be, not only for our riding and our performance, which is going to be kind of what we're heavily looking at today, but also for nervous system regulation for ourselves and for our animals, and as well as just improving the connection that we have not only with ourselves and our bodies, but how to also gift that to our horses. So really improving our connection and a deep understanding of the feedback that our horses are giving us, and really learning how to utilize the power of our breath to make that happen. Okay. So this is one of my favorite quotes, basically saying that fear is just excitement without the breath. And a little bit of my history and what's brought me into breath work, much like Vicki was saying, I'm entering into my 18th year in practice. Primarily, my practice has been focused on equine chiropractic. And I really got into Pilates around 2015 and noticed like just the tremendous benefits, not only in how I felt in my body, but what it did for my riding as well. And so in like early 2016 into 2017, I became certified as a Pilates instructor. And that was one of the first training programs where I was really taught about breath work and how to utilize our breath to create functional movement. So how do we use our breath to create power within our body and to create flexibility and ease? So basically creating power without excessive tension. So I would say Pilates was my entrance into breath work. I also am a shamanic practitioner, so I've had experience in a very different type of breath work with just connecting with the selves and using it for meditation. But in 2018, I'm sure many of you can relate to this. I imported a 3-year-old warm blood from Europe. He was and is a very good boy, but what became very evident as we went along our journey with the young horse, a lot of his behavior that really looked like him just being very calm was actually a pretty high degree of shutdown. And he just, when he became like overwhelmed and didn't understand what was going on, he would just sort of mentally disappear and it would lead to an explosion, which typically was bolting. But what I really found as we came through, like getting to know him here stateside, and just, he only had about 6 weeks under saddle when I got him. So really kind of getting into the ridden work, it became very evident he would hold his breath. And that was something that I battled, gosh, until we moved in 2020. So I had about a solid 2 to 2.5 years of feeling like I had this very erratic horse. Most days I would go into a ride, like just fingers crossed, hoping that nothing bad would happen. Or, I do a lot of groundwork with my horses, but, making sure, always feeling like I had to do a bunch of groundwork or lunge him just to make sure to at least gift myself that feeling of safety. And it was when we moved out of the Bay Area in 2020, my horses now live at home. I started playing with how can I use my breath? Because I have this horse who actually doesn't know how to breathe functionally either. Any sort of anxiety or worry, or if anything shifted in the environment, I could feel him. Like he would just take a big deep breath in and hold it until, he started to panic because he couldn't breathe. And then I get a behavior that was very undesirable. Or I would notice, like, even if he was more relaxed, like if I would just close my leg around him, he would almost hold his breath and like puff out his rib cage. So I have Felix to thank for really forcing me down this road. It's a road I wasn't really sure I wanted to go down, but here we are. And it's been really transformative. And I really started it with this idea of I have to teach this young horse how to breathe when I'm on him so that I can stay safe. And what very quickly happened is I started to unravel a lot that I was holding, just tension in my body that I didn't even realize was there. And I found that the more I could connect my breath to bringing ease into my body, it automatically translated into my horse. He stopped holding his breath. Or even when his breath holding wasn't related to me, it gave me this really beautiful, beautiful vehicle that if I could just regulate my breath and breathe in a way that he could literally feel and he could hear, it provided like a template for him to do the same. And it became this very powerful tool for diffusing situations that quite frankly, I didn't enjoy, and they were quite scary most of the time. And I would say we're now 3.5 years later, and I've got a really calm, centered, grounded horse that I can say we haven't had a bolting issue in 4 years. So it's really my goal to help give you guys a little bit of a framework of what you guys can do today and take away today to at least start connecting your breath and how you can use that with your horses. So I'm sure everybody's heard of breathwork at this point, and I would say it's a very large umbrella for us to work under. And what I mean by that is there's a multitude of different styles of breathing. I really hold it as like they are all valid and great. I find that too, you start going down the breathwork rabbit hole and things can get they can get very confusing very quickly and kind of overwhelming because there are a tremendous amount of techniques that can be employed. So what we're going to go over today is what I have found through trial and error that I find is really effective for you guys as riders and as horse people. And tools that you guys can have in very clear and concise ways to help you either in the saddle or out of the saddle during a competition state, to help you guys just increase harmony within your own body and your own horses. So the three main things that we're going to look at today as it relates to breath work is posture and performance. And then we're going to look at how we can use our breath to regulate the nervous system of horse and rider. And then we'll end with using breath work for connection and coherence. So I want to start with just a little bit of anatomy around what is happening when we breathe and how does this relate to our horses and how do our horses feel our breath and how do they feel our body? So to start, when we take a breath in, we've got some major muscle groups that we're going to be dealing with. So first is the diaphragm, which is a very big, broad, flat muscle that it basically starts at the tip of our sternum. It connects to our rib cage, all of our ribs in the front, wrapping around the back of our body, and it connects to our spine at our thoracolumbar junction. So that's where our rib cage ends and our lumbar spine begins. So this diaphragm, it also separates our thoracic cavity from our abdominal cavity. So that's what separates the heart and the lungs from all of our gastrointestinal organs and reproductive organs. So when we take a breath in, this diaphragm that's sitting underneath our rib cage, it actually is meant to contract and it'll drop down. And as that diaphragm drops down, it actually creates a vacuum that helps draw air into our lungs. And then we have what are called the intercostal muscles, which are all of those tiny muscles in between our ribs that connect rib to rib. They relax. So this function of the diaphragm dropping down, our intercostal muscles relax and our rib cage can expand so that we can bring air into our body. And then our abdominal muscles, ideally, they expand as well, creating space in the belly for that diaphragm to drop down and for basically the volume of our lungs to increase. And then when we breathe out, we have the opposite thing happen. So that diaphragm relaxes, it moves upward, pushing the air back out of our lungs. Our intercostal muscles will actually contract, drawing our ribs back in. And then the abdominal muscles also engage a little bit to help assist pushing air up and out of the lungs. So I've got a little video here where you guys can see the action of the rib cage moving. We've got the diaphragm is here in pink, and we can see the attachment at the back of the spine. It connects to all of the ribs coming up to the sternum and around. So as we breathe, our whole rib cage should open. It should open and expand. Our belly should open and expand as well. And then as we exhale, everything should come back towards neutral. So the other thing that's very important, and we're going to kind of talk more about the diaphragm here in a bit, but when we think of riding and how we breathe, what is happening in our pelvic floor is actually incredibly important, regardless of whether you're male or female. So our pelvic floor, we've got a picture here on the right. They're a whole muscle support system that sits in that pelvic bowl, and that helps keep all of our internal organs, all of the abdominal internal organs up in our body. So what's really important to understand is this pelvic floor works in direct relationship with our diaphragm. It actually works antagonistically. So what that means is when we take a breath in, that diaphragm contracts and it moves down. Now, what happens or should happen at the same time is the pelvic floor muscles relax. So that's where the antagonistic action is. We've got the diaphragm at the top is contracting, the pelvic floor at the bottom is relaxing, but they both move down together. So ideally, when we take a breath in, the diaphragm contracts and moves down, the pelvic floor relaxes, opens, and moves down as well. When we exhale, that diaphragm relaxes, the pelvic floor contracts, and they both move up at the same time. So again, why this is so important is we are literally, when we sit on a horse, they are feeling the micro movements in our pelvis and in our breath. And if we have dysfunction in the way that we're breathing or the way that our diaphragm is moving, it's also directly relating either the strength. So with our pelvic floor, most of us, I would say what is most common is that we have a weak pelvic floor. We can also carry far too much tension in our pelvic floor. And both of those things can create a tremendous amount of breathing issues. And I am not a pelvic floor specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the most common things that are done to help bring a pelvic floor into correct integrity is to change the way that we breathe. So the other important component before we tie all of this together is to look at our sacrum. So our sacrum here, if we were a horse, would be our croup. It's this big flat bone that extends from our lumbar spine. And then we have our tailbone. So when we take a breath in, the normal movement of our sacrum, if we were to think of our tailbone being down here at the bottom, is when we breathe in, the sacrum or our tailbone should come up and a little bit back. And then as we exhale, that sacrum or our tailbone, it moves down and it comes in. So if we think of on an in-breath, that diaphragm, it contracts and moves down, the pelvic floor relaxes and moves down, and then that sacrum, it actually moves up and back. So on an in-breath, we're creating space and openness in our pelvis. And on an out-breath, on an exhale, we're actually contracting the pelvic floor, and that tailbone is actually moving down and coming under us. So the beautiful thing about looking at this is we can harness these natural movements or the natural rhythms that should be happening in our body. We can bring some awareness into the breath to use this to our advantage in how we ask a horse to go forward, how we ask a horse to come back to us. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how we can use our breath for really our fundamental things in dressage training or any form of riding, but tend to be very elusive for people. So I find breath and the half halt go hand in hand. And I find also helping people when they find the half halt really tricky, if we can focus on what we're doing with the breath and a little bit of what's happening at the bottom of our pelvis and our tailbone, it can be completely revolutionary in how we help, this really fundamental aspect of riding, just with our timing and with our feel. I do want to touch briefly, because this is focused on posture and performance and how we can help riders. I think we've got to at least just put a little bit of attention on the lungs and the diaphragm of the horse and how, like again, tying into what is existing in our body and how that's influencing them. So for horses, their lungs are actually sitting up underneath the scapula. And if we look at the curve of the withers here, ideally our center of gravity, we want to be as close to the horse's center of gravity as possible, which is right at base of the withers here. We are sitting directly over a huge portion of the horse's lungs. We are literally wrapping our legs around our horse's lungs and how they breathe. So for me, I think it's very important for us as riders to think like if we're not breathing functionally, or if we're holding tremendous tension in our pelvis, the pelvic floor, or in our diaphragm and how we breathe, that automatically changes how our legs drape over our horse. And it automatically changes our horse's ability to breathe also. So we also need to remember we are riding prairie animals who are high flight animals. So one of the ways that we can take a horse from a parasympathetic state, which is fight or flight, parasympathetic is resting and digesting, into a sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, is to limit their ability to breathe or to make them feel like they're trapped in the breath. This also ties very much into the equipment, saddle, rider balance. All of these things can directly affect a horse's ability to breathe. Last year, I did a seminar for you guys on posture and conformation. I'm going to do a shameless plug. It's free. You guys should go watch it. I also have a webinar on my website on understanding the equine spine and how the equine spine moves or how it should move in motion. So that can provide a little bit of insight onto the thoracic spine and all of the dynamic movement that's meant to happen there. And so really allowing our horses the ability to breathe, to have appropriate movement throughout their trunk is one of the ways that we can bring a tremendous amount of ease into their workload. And then their diaphragm, much like us, it also separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. It's huge in horses. So it extends from the ninth rib, which actually is still covered by the scapula. So it actually, starts up in here. It runs all the way down, through the belly. It attaches at the sternum. One of its main anchor points is around L1, L2, which is, if we think of saddle, it's typically where the back of, maybe just a little behind where back of a dressage saddle would hit. It's also a transitional area. It's where the thoracic spine ends and the lumbar spine begins. So there's a tremendous amount of movement there in the spine. Just due to horses being on four legs and not having good spinal support in general, It's one of the places where there's the most downward effects of gravity on a horse's back. So if we have dysfunctional saddle fit, if we're sitting, if all of it is being hit at the back of the saddle, if we're riding horses, with a tremendous amount of tension in our core and our legs, we also stop that diaphragm from moving, which can limit their breath. And it also locks out the movement in the mid back as well, which is just incredibly problematic for all forms of riding in general. All right. So one of the key things that I really want you guys to take away from today is that our posture affects breath and our breath direct affects our posture. So we think about our posture, we travel through the world in daily life, but also our posture when we're riding on a horse. No guys ride for pleasure or casually or competitively. We all know the better our posture on the horse, the more effective we become, not only for biomechanical purposes, but also just for general, the more correct we are in our posture, the less fatigue we have on our muscles, and the more efficient we become as athletes. So what I want you guys to also keep in mind is the posture that we have on a horse, they will automatically mirror that. And that is just due to the fact of where we sit on their spine. There's nothing supporting. So if we are riding in a slumped posture, it automatically, as we close those pectoral muscles around the upper back, our head translates forward. We actually collapse in the core and we leave very little room for that diaphragm to move so that we can breathe effectively. This posture also biomechanically throws a tremendous amount of tension into the base of a horse's neck, which will cause them to lift the head and compress at the poll. So yes, we have to have the responsibility for looking at our physical fitness and correcting as much as we can by just having good fitness and good posture, but we can also use the breath to help open and bring awareness to different parts of our body and to automatically, or to create more of a direct line to changing our posture in the saddle. So one of the other, I would say there are two dysfunctional postures that I see the most, and one is just, we could call this a chair seat, it's a slump posture, or just people being chronically in a driving posture. But one of the really tricky ones is people riding with an incredibly tight and arched back. And I feel this is something, we're always taught to sit up and to bring the shoulders down and back. And I mean, absolutely no criticism to either one of these riders. These are just random pictures that I pulled from the internet. And I don't know what was happening before and after this that evoked these postures. But when we sit with a tremendous amount of tension or a hyperlordotic posture in our back, it actually forces us to breathe primarily through the top of our lungs, which actually happens when we're sitting in a slump posture also. But it also negates the ability to effectively use our lower abdominal muscles. So I would say when we look at slump posture, we lose effective engagement of the upper abdominals. And when we sit with an arched posture, we're forced to only or to primarily use the upper abdominal muscles, and we lose everything from like the belly button down. It completely locks out the SI joints and the pelvic floor, and it creates a tremendous amount of concussion on our low back. And I'm sure, I mean, I can absolutely put myself in this category, learning how to effectively sit the trot. It can be grueling. And I think so many of us, we try and micromanage posture by forcing ourselves into a position and hoping if we can just hold it, we'll eventually get strong enough to do it. What happens 9 times out of the 10 is we end up holding our breath, trying to maintain these postures that are already working against us. So we have some muscle groups that are working far too hard and will fatigue very quickly. And then we have some muscle groups that are fundamental and important that aren't working hard enough. So I have an image here. To me, and this is a concept in Pilates, the ideal posture on a horse is in neutral spine. So I love this image because you can see there's a healthy curve in the thoracic spine. There's a little bit of a curve in the lumbar spine, but overall, When we want to think about being a neutral spine, we want to think of bringing like the tip of our sternum in alignment with our pubic bone. So if this is like the top of somebody's back, and then we've got the pelvis down here, when we move into a slumped posture, our head goes forward, we round at the shoulders, and we basically our sternum gets drawn backward, and then our pubic bone gets thrust forward. So there's no way for our abdominal muscles to work as a continuous whole, and our diaphragm has nowhere to move effectively. Now, if we do the opposite, I'm sorry, I'm rated, so it's a little hard. But if we have the thoracic spine up here and we've got this really arched back, so we've got the sternum that's pushed forward, and then we've got this tailbone that's pushed out behind us, the center of gravity, our gets tipped forward. And again, we also to use our abdominal muscles in a continuous way that's actually really effective for us moving forward. So I'm going to guide you guys through a few exercises just to begin to get an idea of what is a normal posture for you. And then I'm going to breathe you, I am going to breathe you through. I'll take you guys through what it feels to breathe in a slumped or a chair posture or a chair seat. And then with a hyperlordotic lumbar spine, so that arched back. And then I'll guide you guys into a more neutral spine so you can feel that. And then I'll give you guys 2 exercises that you can do before and during riding to help free up your body. So wherever you guys are sitting, you may want to move like to the edge of your chair, but I'd love for you guys to sit as close to what feels like sitting on your horse. So ideally, if you can have both feet on the ground, both of your seat bones anchored in a chair or at the edge of your couch. And I am going to have you close your eyes. And this is it's something that I often have people do because I feel like when we take away our literal eyesight, it allows us to attune into how we feel into our body more effectively. So from here, I'll have you close your eyes. And I'd love for you guys just to breathe at a rate and a rhythm that feels just normal and natural for you. And I just want you to notice, how easy is it to pull air into your lungs? Do you feel like you can efficiently allow air to leave your lungs? And again, just noticing any tendencies of your body. How do you feel at the base of your neck? How do your shoulders and your thoracic spine feel? How does your low back feel? And how do your seat bones feel as you're sitting down? So just doing a little bit of a body scan, and I want you just to kind of lock that sensation into your awareness. And then from here, I want you to imagine sitting in a chair seat. So you're rotating back on that tailbone, allowing your hips and your pelvis to tuck under, maybe allowing the shoulders to come forward. So your shoulders are behind your hips, the head translates forward. Your abdominal muscles should engage because there's no chair back for you to really lay back against. And from here, I just want you to notice what happens to your breath when you sit in this posture. How easy is it to draw air into your lungs? How easy can you allow air to leave through either the nose or the mouth? And then just noticing how your body feels. How does your neck feel? How does the shoulders and the thoracic spine feel? What is the feeling in the low back? And what is the feeling in the pelvis? And then from here, we're going to move into the opposite. So I want you to imagine sitting up really nice and tall. So imagine that you're being pulled by a string at the top of your head, really allowing that low back to arch. So sitting up really tall, dropping the shoulders back and down. So from here again, I just want you to notice how easy is it to breathe in? How did that change from one posture to the next? How easy is it to exhale? And in general, how does your body feel? So how does the neck feel? How do the shoulders and thoracic spine feel? How does the low back feel? And how does the pelvis feel? So from here, what I'd love for you guys to do is to put just to put a finger on the very tip of your sternum. And if you want, you can put your other hand over your pubic bone. And I want you to imagine just bringing that tip of your sternum and your pubic bone into more alignment. So it should change the way that you feel on your seat bones. You should feel more balanced. And then from here, holding this posture, I want you to bring your hands just down on top of your thighs. I want you to notice, how does it feel to breathe in? How does it feel to exhale? And then notice how your abdominal muscles are engaged in this posture. So for me, what I feel already is my oblique muscles. So those muscles on the sides of my body feel more engaged. I feel my scapula automatically want to move down my back, which allows the shoulders to be anchored down. And I feel like I can take very even breaths in and out. So when you guys are ready, I'm going to have you maintain this posture if you can, but you can go ahead and open your eyes. And I want you to find a point, just allowing your gaze to anchor softly in front of you somewhere. So you don't have to look at something with deep intention, but allow your eyes to open. This allows your brain to orient where your body is in this posture in space and time. And again, just notice how it feels to breathe with our sternum and our pubic bone in greater alignment. Noticing how your neck feels. You may have some muscles that are a little weak that may be engaged, and that may feel a little bit different. One of the exercises that I love to have riders do is, once we find this neutral spine, is you can either, depending on how long your arms are, you can put your hands on either side of your rib cage, or if you have very long arms, you can even kind of put a hand on either side. Very short arms, so I'm just going to put a hand on either side. I would love for you to close your eyes again. And again, thinking of keeping that our sternum and our pubic bone in alignment with one another. As you breathe, I want you to bring awareness into breathing out through the sides of your rib cage. So I want you to think of, as you breathe in, you're going to push your hands out to the side. Then gently exhaling through the nose or the mouth. I want you guys to continue this breath with the eyes closed. So imagine that as you breathe, you're asking your rib cage to expand out to the side, pushing your hands out to the side. Now, in reality, when we do this, we're also extending through the front of the body and through the back of the body. And then I want you just to bring a little bit of awareness that as you inhale and that rib cage moves out to the side, just noticing what your abdominal muscles are doing. And then noticing how your abdominal muscles feel as you exhale. And let's do that 3 more times. And I want you to notice too what your sacrum and your low back do when you breathe out through the sides of your rib cage. So after 3 breaths, you can bring your hands back down to your thighs. Then the last thing we're going to do is as we breathe in, so through the inhale, I'd love for you guys to do it through the nose if it's possible. But I want you guys to imagine taking a big deep breath in and drawing that breath all the way down to your seat bones. So this is using some internal feel and some guided imagery. So imagining as we draw the breath in through the nose, we're taking a big deep breath in, but imagine that breath anchoring all the way down to your seat bones. Then gently exhaling through the nose or the mouth. I want you guys to continue this breath cycle 4 more times of breathing in through the nose, drawing that breath all the way down your seat. I want you just to notice your lumbar spine and sacroiliac joints, pelvis do when you breathe this way. Let's do 1 more breath. When you're done, you can go ahead and open your eyes. So these 2 exercises of breathing out through the sides of our rib cage, so putting our hands on our sides and thinking of moving our hands out, that creates this beautiful engagement of our whole core. So all of our abdominal muscles and our back muscles, it engages them in a way that's very beneficial to riding. So this is something that I often do when I ride, and it's something that when I work with people in their breath work with riding, this is something that we really do of, we've got to break this down into very usable steps for you guys to approach. So imagine like when you're doing a posting trot, or if you're just walking around thinking, like if I've got my arms at my sides and I'm holding the reins, can I breathe in a way that moves my upper arms out a little bit? And think of breathing out through the sides of my body. What that does is it forces us to not breathe through the top of our lungs, which is what we have a tendency to do. If we're in a slump posture or a really tight arched posture, it forces us to breathe through the tops of our lungs. Or if we're struggling to get breath in, or if we're in a fear state, we tend to bring all of our breath up and just breathe. It's actually like a panting stress breathing that we do. So the more we can think of bringing the breath to, like, as I'm doing the trot or the canter or the walk, can I think of like every time I breathe in that I'm moving my rib cage out to the side, and as I exhale, these upper arms, not that we're flapping, but thinking of like, can I create some subtle movement in my rib cage so it feels like even though my arms stay softly at my sides, there's some movement outward and coming back in. Um, to me, this is also a beautiful way to help us find that alignment of keeping the sternum, or that tip of our sternum, which is the xiphoid process, over our pubic bone. So when we think of breathing out through the sides of our lungs, it keeps us from collapsing or just pushing the chest out. And it really helps engage all of our core muscles and the pelvic floor in a really healthy way for riding. And then doing the breath, where we're breathing into the low back and bringing that breath all the way down to our seat bones. This is something that I recommend, like when you guys first get on, especially if you have a horse who tends to be a little nervous, or a little hot. This can be a very beautiful way. If we just use our intention and a little bit of imagery, you can keep your eyes open. I actually don't recommend you guys necessarily close your eyes while you're breathing on your horse unless either someone's on the ground there supporting you, or if you just know your horse and it's not going to be a problem. But even when you first get on, before you even take a step and start, it doesn't have to be like these big, huge breaths, but just imagining as I breathe in, imagining that breath coming all the way down to your seat bones and then gently exhaling through the mouth and doing that 3 or 4 times. 99.9% of the time, you'll feel the horses go, like they'll take a big deep breath also. It's very soothing and calming for them. It just neutralizes our whole body. It softens and opens our pelvis, and it really softens our connection to how our legs lay over their rib cage. So this is something that I would really encourage you guys to play with. So when you first get on, can you bring the breath all the way down to the seat bones? That'll also help you anchor into, are you actually feeling your seat bones? And then once you get into movement, just drawing your awareness to, can I breathe out through the side of my rib cage? The breathing out through the side of your rib cage is a great thing to practice off of your horse as well. So everything that we just went through of, stacking the tip of your sternum over your pubic bone, and then breathing out through the rib cage. It's also a great thing to do off the horse, just to help gain that balance, understanding your body and allowing your body to gain some strength and conditioning out of the saddle as well. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about just briefly is how do we breathe for nervous system regulation? So the biggest nerve that we really need to focus on is the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve. It actually runs for us, it's from the jugular foramen, so on either side of our neck. It goes down our body. It actually runs, through our diaphragm. So it's one of the longest nerves in our body. So it runs through the diaphragm, and it basically gives feedback to the brain. It tells the brain how our internal organs are working. So it helps regulate heart rate, our breath rate, our respiratory rate, and how our GI tract is functioning. So if we're not breathing correctly to where we're using our diaphragm correctly, that can greatly affect the vagus nerve and put us in a chronic state of fight or flight. So it can cause our heart rate to go up. It can cause digestive issues. And again, when we go into this really shallow panting breath, we're basically telling every other system in our body that we're in a stressed state. So learning how to breathe to affect the vagus nerve in a positive way not only helps us feel better in our body, but it makes us feel better to our horses. So we're not coming in like on a blaze of glory or a ball of fire. We can come in a more regulated state. So I want to talk just a little bit about how we can breathe to support our vagus nerve. The best thing that you guys can do is called belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. So again, if you guys are sitting, again, like you're sitting on a horse, on your chair, we can stack again the sternum over the pubic bone. This is drawing the breath all the way down into the belly, like allowing our belly to push out and expand when we breathe in. And we really want to think of exaggerating that. So think of giving yourself a Buddha belly as you breathe in. And I like to breathe in to where I feel everything stretch internally. And it's like I literally can't take in more air, and then gently exhale either through the nose or through the mouth. And let's repeat that 3 more times. So breathing in, allowing the belly, drawing the breath all the way down to the belly button, allowing the belly button to expand or the whole belly to expand. And then allowing the breath to leave through the nose or through the mouth. I'll have you guys do that 2 more times. Like again, just noticing how your body feels when you breathe that way. So for me, this is a style of breathing that's not necessarily helpful when we're riding a horse, but it can be incredibly helpful going into stressful situations. So this is something you can do driving on your way to the barn, as long as you can keep your eyes open while you're doing it. It's something you can do while you're grooming your horse, or even just taking 4 or 5 breath cycles before you go and get on, of just allowing that belly to expand. Because what that does is it forces, when we breathe in, again, we're contracting that diaphragm, but we're kind of taking it to like max exertion and allowing it to move down. And then as we exhale completely, we're allowing it to relax and come all the way up. So we're basically improving the strength of our diaphragm and taking it through a full and complete range of motion. When we do this consistently, it basically soothes or takes any stress or tension off of that vagus nerve. So because it runs through the diaphragm, if we have an asymmetrical tension pattern in the diaphragm, or if we have big postural asymmetries, which can cause, areas of the diaphragm to be tighter than others, we can have asymmetry in the diaphragm. One of the things that we can do to help strengthen and to bring some harmony to that is this deep belly diaphragmatic breathing. Other things that we can do are box breathing, which is breathing in typically for a 4 count. So breathing in, taking a big, full, deep breath of air for 4 count, holding it for a 4 count, exhaling for a 4 count, holding at that exhale for a 4 count, and then repeating. What they found when it comes to helping the vagus nerve, actually just changing the rate. So exhaling longer than we inhale is one of the best ways that we can support the vagus nerve. So there's also what's called 4-7-8 breathing, which is breathing in for 4, holding for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. I personally like the 4-7-8 breathing more than the box breathing. I find it just more soothing. But doing these breaths, the deep diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing, or the 4-7-8 breathing, it's a way to automatically switch us from a sympathetic fight or flight state into a parasympathetic resting or digesting state. Now, I want to say something, and I feel like this sort of can get lost in the fray. Do not ever do box breathing or a type of breathing that requires you to hold your breath while you're sitting on your horse. I'm going to say that again. Do not do any style of breathing that requires you to hold your breath while you're sitting on a horse. And I say that mainly because the majority of horses may not have a problem with it. But if you're at a horse show and your heart rate is up, your stress rate is up, your horse is, really wound up, what we don't want to do in that moment is go, oh, I need to relax, I'm going to do box breathing. Because what happens is we take a big deep breath in and then we hold, which to a flight animal or a prey animal is kind of the universal signal for, oh my God, things are about to get real. So I don't ever want people to get hurt. And I just feel like anytime we're sitting on a horse and we hold our breath, we're automatically sending tension into their body. And we're also telling them that perhaps they should hold their breath as well. So if we're going to do box breathing or a 4-7-8 breathing, it needs to be done when you are not sitting on your horse. So what we can do when we're riding, and I feel like this is wonderful for competition situations. Ideally, you guys would do some regulated breath work before you got on. But if you find yourself riding, let's say your horse spooks and they get like super fired up, what I do is I automatically think like, am I breathing out through the side of my rib cage so that I'm bringing stability to my core and I'm sitting on my horse in a really nice and balanced way that's supporting them without inhibiting them. And then what we want to do for the breath is just extend our exhale. It does the same thing as the diaphragmatic breathing and the box breathing and the 4-7-8 breathing, but it's a very safe thing to do on your horse. So what I'll do is, like, if I'm doing a posting trot and if my horse feels tight or tense, like, I'll count. So in my mind, I'll think inhale 2, 3, 4, and then I'll exhale for 6 or 8 and I'll count it down. I'll go exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Now, I would encourage you guys just to run that through your mind because we can only speak on an exhale. So if we have a tendency to hold our breath, speaking and breathing, like saying stuff out loud, can be helpful. But in general, it's really hard to speak and breathe in at the same time. So I think of it like a metronome in my mind, like breathing in for a 4 count, exhaling for a 6 to 8 count. And I think that I'm breathing out through the side of my body. That'll do the same thing to drop your heart rate down, which gifts that to your horses as well. Okay. I just want to leave you guys. Don't hold your breath and breathe while you're on your horse. All right. And the last thing we're going to wrap up for just very quickly. This is actually one of my favorite things about breath work is how do we breathe for connection? So, and this in and of itself is a whole body of work. But basically, when we practice breathing, and we can practice with all of the things that I've given you today, but when we take quiet moments just to focus on our breath and drop our heart rate down, we come into a greater state of coherence, which is basically just bringing harmony between our physical, mental, and emotional states. So what this basically does is like, even if you're driving out to the barn and if you've had a really stressful day at work, just sitting in the car and closing your eyes. And even if you just breathe in for a 4 count, exhale for an 8, and maybe you do that for 2 to 3 minutes before you get out of the car, it helps regulate your heart rate. It brings some calm to your body. And your emotional state, but also our bioelectric field, which the HeartMath Institute is an amazing resource. They're actually in Santa Cruz in California, and they've done a tremendous amount of research studying the bioelectric field, which is this electrical field that extends off of our body. You could also call it your energy field or your aura, but they also measure the bioelectric field that comes from the heart space. And they've actually done a tremendous amount of research on horses, looking at how big the field of energy that extends from a horse's heart, and it's massive. It's like 50 feet. So if we think of, if we can bring ourselves into a greater state of coherence, when we go and meet our horse, they're picking up on our whole vibe is a more cohesive, coherent state. And what the HeartMath Institute found is a calm horse in a, a happy environment, kind of happy life, calm, relaxed state, automatically can bring us into more coherence when we are open to it. Meaning, if we're not just mindlessly like talking to everybody at the barn and doing 20,000 things and checking our phone and grooming our horse, but if we just breathe and pay attention and just be in the moment, a horse in a regulated state automatically brings us into a regulated state. And the opposite is also true. The more we learn how to regulate our heart rate and to keep our mental bodies, so our thoughts and our emotional states well regulated, and to keep calm when we keep our breath moving, we can also gift that to our horses when they're stressed. They will automatically want to sync up with a being who is more energetically and emotionally regulated than they are. So I'd really encourage you, the HeartMath Institute. They've got a tremendous amount of research that you can access for free on their website. And they've done a lot of work with horses that's really, really interesting. And then another way for breath work for connection, as we breathe, we become more attuned to what is happening on the inside of our body. It can allow us to actually pay attention to where we're holding tension in the body. We can breathe into those areas and we can relieve stored stress and trauma that we hold in our body. If you guys haven't, The Body Keeps the Score is an amazing book by Bessel van der Kolk. He's a medical doctor, and he basically has done research on how we store emotions and trauma in our body. And one of the most efficient and effective way that we can liberate ourselves if we've had injury or anything else is to breathe into those areas, and we can actually use the breath to help move our emotional states. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions. I can't believe that was 55 minutes. But let me, just before we go to any questions, if you guys want more information or if you want to ask questions or get a hold of me, you can find me through my website, which is tracyrainwaters.com. On my homepage, there's a pop-up. I've got a free grounding meditation that you guys can access for free. It's about 15 to 20 minutes. It's a great thing just to incorporate into your day-to-day life. And then I'm on Instagram at dr.rainwaters. So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. I have 3 questions, but I want to open it up to everybody else as well. So does anyone else have a question they want to pop in with? No? Okay. Be sure you unmute yourselves if Remember to unmute before if you're trying to ask a question. Um, I have, my first question is about girths.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are all kinds of shapes now. There's all kinds of, information about girths. And what I do know is that the right girth shape, these quote unquote anatomical shapes, whether it's a forward shape or a middle shape or a backward shape, depends on your horse's, how the saddle fits on your horse's shoulders and withers and where that pressure point and the natural girth line are.
Mm.
And so knowing that, the girths with these elastic inserts, some people are worried that they can pinch. Other people swear by them. Do
Yeah.
you have an opinion on that and whether that helps the horse because we're sitting right there on top of their lungs?
I've got a couple of thoughts. I mean, first of all, like girth shape, there's so much out there and it can really vary horse by horse. So every horse's anatomy is different. So again, you guys go watch the posture and conformation webinar. If we look at our horses from the side, if we look at where the girth would sit, every horse has what's called a girth groove, which is, if we look like right behind the elbow, there's like an uptick and then their belly where that starts. So if you guys start looking at horses, every horse's girth groove looks wildly different. So some, that girth groove is like right up at the elbow, which means you're going to be probably fighting pretty hard. Those saddles are going to want to go up over the horse's shoulders. Some horses, like if you look at thoroughbreds, they've got that girth groove is like halfway down their back.
Mhm.
And then, most horses, there's something that falls in the middle. So depending on the shape of your horse's girth groove that's really gonna have a big impact on the shape of girth that you pick. Um, that is a very long, involved conversation. What I will say, I am a huge fan of, I like having elastic on either side where you buckle.
Mm.
I feel like you have to be careful that you don't over tighten, but I feel like when you have elastic on both sides, there's some allowance for the horse for that rib cage to expand and move. My other big thing is I love natural fibers. So leather, as long as you keep it clean, so it's not drying, cracking, and abrading your horse, or using real sheepskin, not a synthetic sheepskin. Because what happens is when we have natural fibers, when horses sweat, the way the muscles and the skin sit together, we ideally want the muscles and the skin to be able to glide. So, and please don't come at me if you feel differently, but some people love synthetic like neoprene girths. I feel like, well, they create a tremendous amount of heat and friction, and they can also limit how the muscles and the skin move underneath one another.
Mm.
So for me, like a general rule of thumb is I really like to see elastic on either side. There are a lot of interesting anatomical ones now where the elastic gussets there's like a piece that sits on the sternum and then there's an elastic gusset on the side and then more leather going up. That's where I've heard there's some controversy over, does that pinch the horse? If I found anything to be true, it kind of depends on the horse's anatomy and the saddle fit. So my general guidelines in allowing a horse to breathe is stick to natural fibers, keep your stuff as clean as possible, and making sure that we're not over tightening our girths, which is a fine line of keeping them snug enough. So, but
Right.
I find like stuff that doesn't have elastic, we kind of either get into a space of where we don't tighten them enough and that becomes a problem, or we really over tighten and then there's nowhere for the rib cage to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My second question is probably something that's intuitive, but at
Hey,
the same
Vicky,
time, yeah.
there was a question in the chat
Oh, I'm
um,
sorry.
from Jackie.
Okay.
I don't know if she wants to come off of her on her mic and ask the question, or if she just wants the question read.
Jackie, do you feel like talking or no? Oh,
Oh,
can't hear you. Oh,
maybe.
there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have a laptop and a big screen connected. I had to open the laptop. Yeah. So I've noticed for a long time that in posting trot, I think I breathe. Just in talking about the breath work, I think I'm breathing on every up in the post and down, when I post down. And that causes me to like hyperventilate. So you get on your horse, and then I go into a nice warm up and I hyperventilate and I have to take a break. And then I kind of sort things out. But it made me wonder, is there a breath work for posting specifically? Since sitting, I don't have this problem. I find some sort of a rhythm, but in posting trot, I just seem to get carried away with trotting during posting. And I don't know if there's any thought you have on that.
Yeah, so I think the posting trot is a great way to start practicing some of this breath work. So what I would do and what I would recommend is you don't have to start with extending the exhale, but just breathing in and out at a steady rhythm. And I would pick a 4 count. So in your mind, you want to think like you're going to allow your body to do what it knows how to do, which is to post the trot. But in your mind, I want you to think inhale, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you trot and canter, you're moving at a higher rate. So when we think of things being a metronome, your breath is automatically going to be faster. It's going to need to be. But thinking that even if that count moves faster, that you're still inhaling for a 4 count, exhaling for a 4 count. So I would start with just keeping the inhale and the exhale very symmetrical. But I find that like I really at times have to come back to counting that off in my mind to give, this is something that if we're not used to thinking about our breath, it's going to be a bit of a practice to retrain how we breathe. So start with just bringing very symmetrical breathing and just seeing like, maybe you can only hold it for a 2 or a 3 count. Start there. And then when that gets comfortable, try taking it up to 4. But just bringing this like a conscious awareness into, and then I would also focus on breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. They do say it's healthier for us if we can train ourselves to always just breathe in and out of the mouth. I personally find that incredibly hard to do when I'm doing a physical activity. So even then bringing into like, can I breathe in my nose for a 4 count, exhale through the mouth for a 4 count. So the breath can become more circular and just attune to it that way. And then notice what that does for your breathing. Because if you're breathing like inhaling and exhaling with every up and down, that is automatically putting you into like a stress state of breathing, which is probably, why you're fatiguing very quickly. So again, also just having compassion and understanding that this is like learning a new physical activity, even though we all breathe all day long. Changing how we breathe can be uncomfortable. So it's just something that we stick with and we chip away at it. But I would say, yeah, the number one thing I would say actually for most of you guys, when you want to try breathing when you ride, start first with just keeping the inhale and the exhale symmetrical. And then if you're kind of in a sticky moment with your horse, extending the exhale. And then as you become very efficient, you can play with extending the exhale as well.
And Jackie, my question was very similar. It's the rhythm of the breathing within those gaits, within the trot and the canter. So you recommend an inhale on the up in a posting trot and exhale as you're down.
Well, so ideally, so if we're going to breathe in for a 4 count, ideally you would be breathing in for an up, a down, and maybe another up. So for me, like I would match the counting in your mind with the rate and the rhythm of the footfalls. And just start playing with it. So again, like when we start bringing conscious awareness to just counting when we breathe, but just being very clear that I'm like my inhale and my exhale need to match and they need to not be like panicked, quick breathing. So what happens is our bodies know how to ride. We know how to do a posting trot. But if you start going, okay, I'm going to count on an inhale and then I'm going to exhale. I'm going to do the inhale through the nose and I'm going to do the exhale through the mouth. We bring our whole body into a more cohesive state and it actually calms our breathing down. And I would be really curious to hear from you guys too. It can also change the rate and the rhythm of how our horses move. So when we breathe in a very even measured rate that isn't a panicked or stressed state, we actually create, our core becomes more dynamic in a really beautiful way, but it takes the tension out of our legs and our pelvis, and it actually gives the horse's place a back to go. So I often find that as we start breathing this way, you'll tend to feel the back come up and there's more swing. And my feeling is as we breathe, And as we soften our back and we take some of the tension out of our body, we actually give our horses space to move underneath us.
Mhm. And the same then for the canter, if we're cantering that to have that relaxation rhythm, it would be the same kind of a thing. You would still
Yeah.
want the 1, 2,
So I would think like, so when I think of canter, I think of more of like breathing in for 2, exhaling for 2, because you've got a 3-beat gait, but you've got this moment of suspension that goes with it. So I think of like the walk can be an in for 4, out to 6. When we're walking, it's very easy to extend the exhale.
Right.
When we're trotting, we're picking up some speed. So we're going to increase the rate that we're counting, but maybe you go in for 3, out for 3.
Mhm.
And then the canter, I typically find it's like in for 2, out for 2.
Okay.
And there's so much nuance in using our breath to coordinate different movements like pirouette canter, different movements and stuff like that. But if we can at least just have some conscious awareness to how we're breathing and just making it very regulated, it helps tremendously.
And is it best for the horse because when they're in their upswing, that's when they're expanding?
Yeah. So,
And
well, so we want to think of, I didn't talk about the half halt. So something I want to leave you guys with too. So yes, ideally, like for us, we would be like inhaling as that front leg, like as, when they're cantering, there's like a moment where that inside front leg is on the ground. As they're starting to come up, we want to think of using the in-breath to pull the body up.
Mhm.
But I often tell people like when we're doing a half halt, we want to use a little bit of an exhalation.
Yeah.
So because when we exhale, we actually pull that pelvic floor up and our abs engage. So we become very solid in the core, and that actually helps draw the horses back kind of up underneath us.
Mhm.
And then something else you guys can do if you have trouble connecting with the lower abdominals, um, when you're riding, when you think of doing a down transition, or if you just want to feel, are my low abs engaged or not, or how do I engage them? You can take your toes when they're in the stirrup and you want to extend them out. So think of separating your toes as far as you can and then lift them up. You can even do that while you're seated and just notice when you like spread your toes and lift them up, your lower abdominal, so from the pubic bone up to the belly button, everything sort of engages and lifts up in a really correct way. But yes, for the canter, like the best thing I can do and tell you guys is just get into a rhythm of just noticing how you're breathing and how the horse is moving and how do I bring symmetry into my breaths and I'm breathing in and out in an equal way. And the faster the horse is going, the shorter number that you're going to have there. So I would say breathing like in for 1, out for 1 would be like a full out gallop. So the slower the horse is moving, the more numbers we're going to have in breathing in and out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great. Great. And that the half halt was my next question was,
Yeah.
and I tend to, and this is where I get into trouble with my breathing is sometimes I tend to push down and exhale and, drive everything into this compressed body to stabilize myself. And I know that tends to just shut him way down too fast.
Yeah.
So,
So often we're told like for the half halt feeling to like bear down, which for correct pelvic floor health, and for people who are women, this can have an effect on us in so many ways, but we want to think of in a correct half halt, we're not bearing down to where the lower abs push out and we're basically destabilizing the core. I mean, you can effectively slam a horse on the ground pretty quickly if you do that forcefully enough and with a lot of intention. But when we want to ask for a half halt or a down transition, which is where like the back comes up, the weight comes on the hind end, and then the front end becomes very soft and the neck can kind of oscillate out a little bit. We want our abdominals, like again, we're not pulling them in towards the spine to where we're rounding our back and we're not pushing them out in front of us where we're basically taking all of the integrity out of the low abs. It's like a corset. So we want to think of, and again, it is a little bit that feeling if you lift and splay your toes. And if you breathe out through the side of your rib cage, all of your abs should work as a corset. So they almost feel like they wrap around and lift up a little bit. And that actually draws the pelvic floor up. And I always envision it's like that pelvic floor lifts and it's actually drawing the horses back up with it as well. So I often will teach people to any down transition should be done on an exhale and with the degree of softness in the low back that you want your horse to mirror. So if you want the back to come up, it's not that we're rounding our back, but we're going to breathe and allow our low back to be soft and fluid. We're going to exhale so that the abs engage and the pelvic floor comes up. And then once the horse is in the down gait that we want, then we can relax and go back to normal breathing and allow them to move forward.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jennifer. Jennifer, do you want to ask the question out loud?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a trainer who had advised me when I was working with one of my horses who could get quite strong and wouldn't listen to half halts and could get a little bit scary. But her advice was breathe out audibly. And that seemed to work and help bring the horse's concentration back to me and probably help me calm myself too. And I just wanted to hear what your thoughts might be on that.
Yeah, so anytime we make an exhale audible, we're really emphasizing that. And we're also amplifying and emphasizing what's happening in our body when we do a down transition. So I think sometimes, like, yes, is there a verbal cue that the horse is probably going like, wait, what? But when, like, again, we can breathe really softly through the mouth, or we can do it with some intensity and intention, which is also going to amplify how our muscles are engaging. So we're also cueing in a much stronger way. And again, you can also try if you have a horse that's blowing through half halts, like, yes, you can become very intentional and kind of forceful with the exhale, because again, your body's going to mimic and mirror that, but also lifting your toes when you want to very intentionally, do a half halt, because again, it engages those low abs and it kind of amplifies what's happening in that pelvic floor. So yeah, I think there's absolutely something to it. I don't know that it's necessarily the verbal, but I do think it's what's happening in your body when you exhale with intention.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, Joel, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it's actually Suzanne, but my question is are there any thoughts that you have on how to use breath work to get rid of some tension on the collected walk? Because I find going from the extended walk into the collected walk before the canter departure, I get a lot of tension there. And I have a Spanish horse who sometimes likes to get extravagant with his front legs. And even though he doesn't technically know how to do the Spanish walk, he likes to throw in a few moves. And I'm wondering if there's anything I can do to help that.
Yeah. So you're still going to want to, like, in that moment when you're coming from a free walk into more of a collected walk. So you want the inhale and the exhale to be reciprocal. So you want it to be an even number, but also thinking of softening your low back. So this may be where you think of breathing into the low back, because if we're starting to pick them up and if we're holding too much tension in the spine, we automatically, I mean, horses will mirror our posture as well. So as soon as there's tension in the back, they'll start kind of throwing the legs, or there's just stiffness in the back. So I would try playing with, can I keep my breath really soft? And can I keep the same amount of softness and flow in my back? Which you can do that just by imagining I'm going to breathe into my lumbar spine. And is my lumbar spine, even though I'm holding them and I'm wanting them to be more together, can I still have softness in my spine so I'm not rigid, which is going to force this rigid sort of mechanical walk in the horse. So again, it's holding that idea of, and in that, I would be thinking of, as the air comes in my nose and out my mouth, that it's very soft as well. and that it's very focused and it's very measured, but can I also keep a little more softness and flow in my back so that I'm giving them a soft space to actually work with? Because to me, that sounds like tension. Like there's just tension in the back that's coming out, with altered movement in the front legs. Does
Great,
that make
thank
sense?
you very much.
Yeah.
We have another one from Allison. Allison, do you want to ask your question? I think you might be muted.
And so I was.
Oh, there you go.
There I am. I'm having trouble with my sitting trot, and I feel that my breathing isn't what it needs to be to keep me relaxed in the saddle. And the minute I start to stop breathing, I start to bounce.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you could shed some, light on that for me and how I might be able to maintain the breath.
Yeah, so I would say when we're correcting dysfunctional or altered ways of breathing, it's so important that this work not just be when we're with the horses and in the saddle. So this is something that we have to bring, much like, any other physical activity, or we could think of it as like physical therapy type of work. It needs to happen outside of the saddle as well. So I would be very curious too, like we would have to look, at your posture at the horse, but on the horse, but also seeing like, what is your posture looking like in a typical sitting trot? And are you shutting down parts of your body? But like we were doing earlier, I would start with belly breathing just to make sure that that diaphragm is mobile and functional. And then just being very sure that even when you're doing the sitting trot, like are your sternum and your pubic bone stacked on top of one another, making sure that we're not really arching the low back. Or, I think us have a tendency sitting trot, we kind of go a bit of a chair seat to help stabilize us, and we tend to push into the block, which again shuts down our breathing as well. So to me, if I had to say this, it sounds like do some work outside of the saddle to identify, how do you normally want to breathe? Do some belly breathing and practice breathing out through the sides of your rib cage and just notice what happens with your core. And when you breathe, like with the sitting trot, like again, you're going to want to breathe in and out, at an even rate. So maybe an in for 2 or 3, out for 2 or 3. And then again, making sure that you're not, sitting back or leaning too far forward. And this may be something that, even just changing your posture and bringing a steady rhythm to the breath, it may be something that you have to work up to being able to do throughout all of your sitting trot. But that sounds like there's a diaphragm issue, whether it's weakness or too much tension, which is more than likely related to your posture when you're riding. So I
Okay.
would say do some belly breath, practice breathing out through, the sides of your rib cage. I do also have an online breathwork course, which I will give you guys a discount code for if anybody's interested in that as well. And I do teach clinics because this is very, we each have individual things, and we have individual postures with the horses and individual postures with the people. But my biggest recommendation for everyone is to do some diaphragmatic deep belly breathing, ideally in the morning before you go to bed. And then just breathe out through the side of your rib cage, just sitting with your sternum and your pubic bones stacked on top of one another, because that helps strengthen all of your core muscles as well. Breathing requires a lot of very intentional and deliberate muscle action within our core, and to actually breathe effectively requires, or it's very much amplified by having correct core strength and correct core mobility.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have that same issue. I'm having the same issues as everybody else. I'm kind of sorry you're having them, but I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I have a very big moving horse, and I think that's also a big challenge, is the stride length, that swing length, and the time up, and finding where that perfect rhythmic breathing falls into place. And it sometimes takes me like the first I pick up the posting trot for the warm up, and I can only get 2 times around, and I'm just like, okay, I gotta walk.
Yeah.
And because I can't seem to expand my diaphragm. I can't get the belly to accept everything. And I think it's because I'm trying so hard to sit around and do all those things right, and that I restrict everything that way.
Yeah.
And then kind of as he gets going, and I, a couple times around more, and we walk a little bit more, and then pick it up, and I'm trying to shorten the amount of walk strides in between each time of going back to work. And that's helped me. And then all of a sudden, it's like my breath just starts doing its own thing,
Yeah.
and it's there. But it's always in that first 5 minutes. It's like, oh, this is a struggle, you
Yeah.
know?
And just to reiterate, we don't want to do the deep belly breathing. We're really extending our belly when we ride, only because it moves our core in a way that when you trot and canter, like it's not going to be helpful. But this is where when too, you can try just focusing on before you go into the trot, like what does it feel like to breathe and expand my rib cage out to the side? Because again, that brings all of your abs into like a high degree of continuity, which you actually need to be able to sit the trot effectively and keep breathing.
Mhm.
What happens is we get fatigued, and what I see now with modern dressage saddles, and it's not really a bad thing, but we're getting bigger and bigger thigh blocks, which can allow us to kind of hinge our weight at the back of the seat and kind of lock into the thigh blocks, which also our breathing. So again, we're retraining our core and our diaphragm. So it's not like you breathe right once or twice and then it's like you got it. I mean, we're retraining core muscles as well, and that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Okay. Anyone else have a question? All right. Well, thank you so much. This was really informative. And I'm the events chair for the chapter, so I'm happy to, if you guys are all wanting a live clinic, please email me and let me know, because we can definitely get that done. So
Could I ask one more question?
yes.
sure.
Okay, I have a really big moving horse too. And I've been having trouble coming into the canter and having him not decide he wants to take off on me. And I think it's my breathing that's screwing, kind of maybe screwing things up. We were doing very, very well, and then we got some weather and an injury, and now I'm kind of working back. So I'm just wondering about, I heard somebody tell me that I should ask for the canter to part at the bottom of my exhale. Would you agree with that? Would there be a different way to work this?
You can try that. My biggest thing that I would think of too, if you're getting kind of a big reaction going into like an upgate, making sure that you're not holding your breath actually as we go, because especially when we start to anticipate something, we tend to go, and then, our whole body becomes very tight. So I tend to, yes, you want to play with an up transition, try either doing it on a gentle in breath, or you can do it on an exhale as well. Like the way I typically ride is I've taught all of my horses that when I exhale with intention, I don't care if their tail's on fire, what's happening, like that means, that is a down cue. So I think of asking for an up, moving up in a gait off of a soft in breath. So it's not a big like, and then we go, but just a gentle kind of like, again, I think it coordinates. So for me, it wouldn't necessarily be like at the bottom of the exhale, but it is like that beginning, that softness at the beginning of an inch. Sounds like probably what that person is communicating. But I would really try as you go into that, can you really regulate the breath? Have it be really soft and continuous? And even just thinking about the gait that you want. Because again, as we hold the image in our mind of what we want, our horses, our body is subtly, again, beginning to communicate what we want. So can we think in our mind and add just that little bit of a gentle in really soft aids and just see what happens?
Okay, thanks so much. And I apologize for holding things up.
That's
Oh,
okay.
no, it's
You're fine.
perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And this will be up on our YouTube, which you can get connection to through our website, or you can just look it up on YouTube. But give us a couple days to get it loaded because it's a big, long kind of upload process. So just give us a couple days. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Tracy directly. And Tracy, you're here doing chiropractic every month.
Yeah.